So today's gospel is one about which a great deal has been written. It's known by most of the biblical scholars and a lot of us who try to preach on it as the fox and hen story. It's a little unusual. It's a little different than the way Jesus usually speaks, and it takes a little unpacking to kind of get at some of the things that are going on in here. When Luke wrote down his gospel, you have to remember it was long after Jesus had died. And in fact, by the time the Gospel of Luke was written, Rome had already sacked the city of Jerusalem and destroyed the temple. In fact, the whole city had been obliterated. One of the things that the Roman army did after they destroyed the city was they poured salt all over the land where the city had stood, so nothing would ever grow there again. So when Rome decided to wipe out Jerusalem, they did it what they thought was forever. So Luke is aware of that. So sometimes when he writes about what Jesus says, there are little hints that he's aware of these things. So that's one of the background pieces to kind of know in hearing this morning's gospel. Jesus, at this point in his ministry, had been on the mountain with the Transfiguration, where he glowed white, and he appeared before three of his disciples with Elijah and Moses, and he's come down, and now he's continuing his journey toward Jerusalem. We know in Luke's account of Jesus' life that he's on his way toward those great events that will lead toward his execution, his crucifixion, and ultimately, of course, to his resurrection. So he's on the road. Where exactly he is, we don't really know. But he's on his way, knowing what his fate is, and expecting to have to face some pretty dire days ahead. So one of the things that we have here are the Pharisees coming to talk to Jesus. And usually we sort of think of the Pharisees as being out to get Jesus. They're like Jesus' enemies. And they're not all that way. Some of them are, some of them aren't. It's like anything else. You can't take a group of people and say they're all bad. Some of them actually were quite supportive of Jesus. And they came to him and they said, you need to, go away because Herod is going to kill you. Herod knows that you're a threat to him. Now, a word about Herod. That king's name comes up quite often in the gospel accounts. This is not the same Herod that the wise men visited back at the time of Jesus' birth. That was Herod the Great. This is Herod Antipas, who's Herod the Great's son and heir. Herod the Great, who was around at the time of Jesus' birth, has died, and his son has taken the throne, but he kept the same name. So it gets a little confusing. So this is a different Herod. But one thing you can be sure of, even if you're not sure which Herod is which in the gospel, they're all bad. They're all troublemakers. They're all out to do in Jesus. They're not really on God's side. They're on their own side. They're ruling from a place of power and strength and wealth. And they're not the least bit afraid to really persecute the Jewish people. Even though he's the king of the Jews, he persecutes his own people in order to wring every last penny out of them to enrich himself and his treasury. Some things never change. But as we get into Jesus' story, he hears that, and his response to that warning that Herod is out to kill him, knowing full well this Herod Antipas, has already killed his cousin, John the Baptist. Jesus doesn't show any fear, no apprehension whatsoever. And he turns to the Pharisees and he says, you tell that fox that this is what I'm doing today and tomorrow. I'm going to be doing some healing and curing of people. And on the third day, my work will be finished. And then today, tomorrow, and the day after that, I'm going to continue my journey to Jerusalem. So far from backing down, he announces to everybody, not only am I running away from Herod, I'm just going to carry out my business and keep on going and walking down the road toward Jerusalem. You can tell him I'm coming, and you can even tell him about when I'll get there. That's not a problem for me. So that shows a couple of things about Jesus. His great strength of purpose. He knows what he's doing. He knows where he has to go to do it. He knows exactly when it's going to happen. And he is not afraid. Doesn't mean he's looking forward to it. I don't think we can go that far. But Jesus walks confidently and unafraid to meet whatever fate is before him, because he knows that it is the will of God. It is the will of his Father in heaven. And he is living into the fulfillment of his Father's will, to follow that way which leads toward love and release and freedom for the whole world. But now Jesus, after saying all that and playing kind of the tough guy for a little while, he kind of gets to be a sentimentalist. And he shakes his head because he said, "Oh, Jerusalem, you have been such a mess for so long." Again, some things never change. And he says, that's the city that always kills the prophets. That's the city, and it is true, because when you look at the history of the prophets, all of them who met their demise in the city of Jerusalem, because they finally came to that place where the great temple is, where they believe God dwelt within that temple in Jerusalem. They go to Jerusalem, to the presence of the Lord for strength, and those who are in power will kill them. Those who don't like to hear the words of repentance, those who don't want to hear the words that you have to follow the law, those who don't want to hear that you need to walk the way that God has set before you, will turn on the prophets and kill them. It foreshadows the very fate that Jesus himself would endure. And then again, even though he knows Jerusalem is a rough place on prophets, he says, you could be such a wonderful place. You could be the place where your children are protected and comforted. Because he says, you see, God is like a mother hen who wants to gather her children under her wings to protect them. What a lovely, beautiful, intimate image of this mother hen literally putting out her wings and gathering her chicks to her to keep them warm, to keep them safe, to keep them sheltered, risking her own life often in the face of predators and other attackers and other inclement weather and environmental factors, but sheltering them and risking her own life to protect her own children, being willing to give up her life, if needs be, to protect those whom she loves. This is a short passage, but it's powerful and it's loaded. It's loaded with Jesus saying, I know I'm going to suffer the fate of the prophets before me. But he gives us a hint that he knows more than even that. Because did you notice that in that first section, it says, you go tell that fox, that predator, the one who would prey on the chicks, the one who would steal the chickens and the eggs out of your gardens and yards, because that's what foxes do. Foxes who are rapacious, they don't care what this might be. They just will steal it, they'll kill it, they'll take it for themselves. You tell Herod, that fox who would do all those things to his people, that today and tomorrow I'm going to do this, but then he uses a very interesting phrase. And he says, and on the third day, my work will be finished. In a few minutes, we will once again recite the words of the Nicene Creed. Those words, on the third day, have another meaning. On the third day, he rose again from the dead. Jesus is foreshadowing not only that he knows that he will suffer the fate of the prophets that have gone before him, but on the third day, something amazing is going to happen, and that's when his work will be finished. His work does not finish on the cross. His work will be finished on the third day when he rises from the grave to restore our lives forever. Because then he goes on to say, and today, tomorrow, and the day after that, I'm going to be doing this, that, and the other thing. All of a sudden, it's not the third day anymore. Now he's talking about his earthly ministry again. So he has that foreshadowing that he already knows not only what great work he is to accomplish for all of God's people, but when, and perhaps even how, it will be accomplished. And so Jesus, in that next section of the story, becomes the mother hen. He becomes the mother hen, again foreshadowing what's going to happen in the days that are following this, rather. He's telling them that he knows that he needs to protect his own people. None of his disciples are killed when he's taken up and arrested and crucified. He shelters and protects them. None of the children of Israel are persecuted because of the work of this man who Herod will claim said he was the king of the Jews. None of them will be injured or harmed, although 40 years hence, Rome will sack the city. But Jesus is giving the very image of the loving God who wants only to protect and care for us, to shelter us from the fox that's out to get us. Well, the fox today is not Herod Antipas. He's long turned to dust and gone. But what Jesus is looking at is there is evil in the world. And in using that very image of the fox, he's trying to describe the kind of evil that we know, the kind of evil that sneaks up in the night and steals a chicken or sucks the eggs, the kind of evil that prowls around and is predatory, the kind of evil that's looking to cause trouble, that's looking for something to steal, that's looking for something to kill. Scripture's filled with images of evil prowling around like a ravenous lion, as the prophet Daniel put it, that evil is looking for us. Evil is looking to try to get to us. But Jesus said, you don't need to fear that fox, because you can tell that fox that I have done the work of healing. I have done the work to cure the sin sickness of evil in the world. And that Jesus is reminding us that he will protect us just as a mother hen protects her flock. That we will be safe. That on the third day something wonderful will happen. That the protective wings of God will stretch out across all of us and around the world to embrace us and shelter us and protect us from evil. That if we will follow the path, if we will follow the path that led Jesus to Jerusalem, if we will follow the path that leads along the will of the way of God, as taught to us by his Son, Jesus Christ, that we too can be protected from evil, that we will dwell in the shelter of his wings, that no harm will come to us, and that we at the end will finish our work on this earth and be lifted up and cared for and protected for all of eternity through the glorious and gracious gift of everlasting life, purchased through the blood of Jesus, the blood shed for us in Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets, the blood that was poured out that we might be enriched and renewed, the blood which we share in the cup and in the broken bread at the altar to remember Jesus' sacrifice for us, to be renewed, restored, protected, and lifted up. That's a lot for a few short verses from Luke. That's a lot to take in. That's a lot for us to try to unpack. But if we follow the path, if we walk the way, if we trust in the Lord, if we seek the shelter and protection of his wings, we will be taken up, lifted up, renewed and transformed into the beautiful and loving children of God whom we were always meant to be.